Welcome to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Dame, holistic nutrition coach and speaker. Let's dive in. Hey, welcome back to another episode here on the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your hostess, Danielle Dame, sugar freedom expert and somatic embodiment coach. And today we are diving into part 2, continuing the conversation with our incredible guest from last week, Dr. Michael Goran, who is here to educate us and really blow our minds on all things related to kids and sugar. So in part 1, we talked about the education and awareness and the science behind what he has been finding doing his research over the last 35 years is really contributing to the increased rates of disease, things like obesity and diabetes in children. And we really lay the foundation in part 1. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, definitely go back and listen to last week's episode. And then come on over here and obviously dive into today's episode where we are continuing the conversation and slightly shifting gears into talking more about the tactical tools and techniques that parents and, humans, adults can really use to support kids and children in their lives to reduce their sugar intake in a manageable way, right? We talk about in this episode, and I love this message that Michael shares around not needing to do it all at once, right? This is a huge undertaking for a lot of you that are listening, whether you currently have children in the home or you have grandchildren or, this can be an overwhelming task to start removing sugar. And Michael shares a lot of really powerful tools and, things that you can do to make this easier on yourself and how it doesn't have to cost you extra. I know that this is a big roadblock for a lot of parents is the extra cost of whole real foods versus junk snacks, right? That have sugar in them. So Michael talks about that and so much more in this episode. We talk about how to help and encourage and even teach children how to self-regulate when it comes to sugar. So how can they begin making their own healthy food choices amongst obviously all the social pressure and all the challenges that they face, out in the world, even outside of the home. We talk about how to actually communicate with your children at any age about the importance of healthy food, right? And the importance of making those decisions and helping them find some sort of intrinsic motivator to make them understand the importance of nourishing their bodies, right? And the effects that sugar is having on them currently and also in their future. We talk about how to navigate social situations, right? And kids' birthday parties and treats at school and, kids at sleepovers or going to the movies with their friends. Like what are some tools that we can use to share with our children to help them make those decisions in a way that feels good for them and isn't necessarily all or nothing, right? So they can still have a little bit without needing to go overboard. And at the end of this episode, Michael touches on the shocking research that him and his team are doing about baby formula and the sugar and let alone all the other chemicals that are actually being added and the lack of regulation around carbohydrates in formula. He shares some really, really scary facts and findings that they're discovering in what is actually being put in formula and how that's actually affecting the growth and development of infants. We talk about so much more in this episode, and I know that you are absolutely going to love this conversation. And if you haven't listened yet to part 1, and for those who aren't familiar with Dr. Michael Goran's work, he is a professor of pediatrics and program director for nutrition and obesity at the Children's Hospital Los Angeles, Keck School of Medicine, USC. In 2021, he founded the Southern California Center for Latino Health, a regional initiative focused on developing academic community solutions to chronic disease disparities in Latino families, and has been funded by over $25 million grant from the National Institute for Minority Health Disparities. His research on infant and childhood nutrition has been continuously funded by the NIH for over 35 years. And Dr. Michael Goran has published over 400 peer-reviewed articles. Michael lives in Silver Lake, LA, and he likes to play tennis, cook, eat, hike, walk his dog, and travel the world. He is also the author of Sugarproof. Protect your family from the hidden dangers of excess sugar with simple everyday fixes. This is his incredible book that is a major recommendation from me for anyone who has children in their life that they love. And the tools and resources that he has put into this book, let alone the amazing recipes and alternatives that you can start using, is really, really life-changing. So you can come and check out all of that below in the show notes. And without further ado, let's play part 2 of this incredible conversation with Dr. Michael Goran. I'd like to switch gears now because I know, we're kind of laying the groundwork here from sort of the first half of your book and understanding a little bit of what's going on. But now, like, I know you've mentioned a few things already, but what can parents or, lovers of children, people who have children in their life, do to actually help lower the sugar intake in kids? I know you shared some amazing ideas around, just the food choices in the grocery store. Are there any other tips that you share to really help parents, make this shift? And I mean, I'm going to go ahead and assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this is easier to do immediately at the start of life or start of food feeding, versus, when the kid is 10 and you're trying to take away the candy from them and and they're throwing a temper tantrum, right?
Definitely, from personal experience, becomes progressively more difficult. So we talked about liquid sugars and the strategy. One of the best ways that you can reduce that is just not to buy it at the grocery store, not to bring it into the house, and keep water as the beverage of choice around the house. The second thing is breakfast, especially for younger kids. Breakfast tends to be a meal of the day that is very high in added sugars, whether it's what you put on your toast or the breakfast cereal or juice with breakfast. Typically, breakfast tends to be high in added sugars, so we have a lot of suggestions in the book about how to easily fix that. For example, there's no rule that you have to put jam on your toast. I love a good piece of toast in the morning myself, but I will put, even just butter or cream cheese, peanut butter without added sugars, eggs, scrambled eggs, lots of different strategies on that. I mentioned breakfast cereal already, so look for healthier brands with less added sugars, below 5 grams added sugar per serving. Dress it up yourself if you have to make it more delicious or acceptable to your kids. Same for yogurt. Look for ones without added sugars or minimal added sugars and dress it up yourself. So we tend to kind of rush together breakfast and get kids out the door quickly and fully energized. And what we're seeing is that they're going out the door fully energized, and then this high sugar meal causes a crash in energy levels several hours later. And in our experience, working with kids and sugar proofing them, we can get them on a more stable path, stable energy. I mean, it's just like there's lots of talk in the adult world about stable blood glucose and monitoring it with glucose monitors and how do we stabilize our blood glucose. It's the exact same issue in children. I would argue perhaps even more critically important for them at school to be able to have a stable blood glucose throughout the day.
Yeah. You bring up a really good question that I wanted to ask as well, like kind of tailing off of this is, what are you seeing with, especially maybe in terms of school, with sugar and behavior in young children, right? Like obviously there's some effects happening here, and we see not only, these diseases that you mentioned, the obesity, the diabetes, but also the mental health disorders, right? And the behavioral issues and the diagnosis for ADD and ADHD and like all of these, kids becoming more challenging, right? Or your kid has so much energy or can't sit still, or like, what are you seeing? Is there a link there between sugar consumption and those behavioral problems and even learning problems, right, in school?
We don't have like a definitive data on any of those things in terms of contributing factors. There is some quite good evidence that uh, higher levels of sugar consumption in kids can impact learning and can impact uh, performance on standardized test scores. In terms of um, mental health issues, like you mentioned, ADHD, anxiety, etc., there's not clear causative evidence, but we do know that dietary shifts can improve symptoms and can improve outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, just even in my own life, seeing a kid who's just had an ice cream cone, right? And is bouncing off the walls, unable to sit still, unable to focus, unable to just do anything except bounce off the walls, right? There's obviously something going on there, right? There's obviously, in my opinion, obviously I haven't done any science on it, but we can just see this effect, right? That kids are just off the walls and parents know. I mean, I see this. I just spent last weekend with my nieces and nephews, and I see this. Like, they had ice cream cones and they just could not regulate their nervous system, right? They could not calm down. They were off the walls, and, and then inevitably eventually will crash, right? And be unable to keep their eyes open, right?
Yeah. So that whole issue of energy highs and crashes, almost all parents will recognize that. But there's this kind of, if you look in the scientific literature, there's actually a classic study published um, maybe 20 years ago that tried to bust that myth, that tried to say there's actually no scientific evidence linking high sugars to energy highs and lows in kids, which we talk about in the book, and we try to break it down and look into in a bit more detail. And it turns out that that most of the studies that have been done in this area, once we looked at them in more detail, compared kids, they would give kids like a sugar meal versus a control, which oftentimes would be the same meal but no sugar, but a sweetener added. And so they were comparing sugar versus sweetener and found that there was no difference in energy levels. And so this paper that was published in a very reputable journal basically says the opposite of what every parents know.
Right. Well, it's not the first
So
time that a research paper has kind of done that, right?
yeah,
Um,
so you know, as a parent, it's your experience, your kids. You know your kids better than uh, the scientists do, and do your own experiments. See for yourself
mhm.
how changing diet might impact those outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great suggestion, right? I mean, try a 30-day, I know you have lots of great challenges on your site and in the book too, but just to do your own experiments at home, I think that sounds like a really great next step
Yeah,
and
and it
challenge.
doesn't have to be 30 days. In the book, we have a 7-day challenge, and
Great.
we have had quite remarkable success in some families who just decided for 7 days to go without added sugar. Now, that's not a recommendation we're saying should be kept. It's just an exercise in seeing, first of all, figuring out where all the added sugars are coming from and finding ways to eliminate them. That in itself is a valuable exercise. And second of all, seeing how you as a parent and your kids adapt to that change. And it might be, the first couple of days are going to be rough. But in pretty much all cases, after those first few rough days, we see pretty remarkable shifts.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is for adults as well, right? This
Yeah,
benefits everybody, right? We get,
yeah,
you
absolutely.
know, when we see that contrast and that difference, it's hard. You can't not see it again, right? Like, oh, and that understanding when we live it in our body of, wow, this is actually what's going on, right? And wow, I have no anxiety. I sleep better. I feel great. I have energy all day, right? Starting to feel these things and putting that was a part of my journey, is really started to notice like, wow, there is another way to live. I had no idea that sugar was robbing me of that, right? And then we can make choices from there. I think that's incredible. So what do you say, or how do you support parents with kids who, are maybe in their early teens, or, in those ages where they've been hooked on sugar their whole life so far, over consuming sugar, right? The sodas, and then you're trying to take them away, right? Like there's going to be some pushback. Like are there certain tools and techniques that you can share that can help parents navigate, that sort of trickier maybe time of age?
Yeah, it does become harder. I think at that, and even for younger kids too, this is true, but more so for these older kids, is trying to kind of hook into their intrinsic motivators. So try to find out what their motivations might be. That could be better looking skin, or fitting into a new pair of jeans, or running faster in the football field. So, because we can link excess sugar to many outcomes, uh, find out what might be their internally motivating factor, not you as a parent's motivational factor, but their motivational factor,
Yeah.
and not using extrinsic motivation like uh, rewards or prizes or money.
Yeah. That's a really, really powerful. I've never thought of it that way. And I mean, obviously working with adults, I can see that being the same, right? Finding like, well, if you don't eat sugar this week or today, we'll buy you a toy, or, we'll do this thing, right? That's external. And we all need to have some sort of internal
Yeah.
motivation. I wish that was communicated to me as a child. Like I've always been a very active soccer player, and that would have really hit home for me, right? Like, do you want to perform better, right? And be able to play a whole half without needing a break, right?
Hmm.
Or, these sorts of feeling good after, instead of feeling exhausted and crashing right at the end of a game. Um, I think that's really brilliant that you said that. And every kid will have, I mean, at any age, it's going to be different, right? Whether it's, like you said, fitting in, or even just maybe not being the worst student in the class, right? Like if you eat a healthier way, you're going to, get better grades, and you're going to feel more proud of yourself, right? Or
Yeah. Yeah.
there's so many conversations that could happen there.
Hmm.
So that leads me actually to my next question is, and I guess this is definitely going to be different. Maybe you can speak to like the younger age group, and then maybe middle age group here. How do you even begin to communicate with your children about nutrition, about food, about the importance of food? Like how do you recommend, and maybe even sharing some personal stories of how you did that with your children, right? And like, how do you communicate in a way that they can understand the importance of nourishing their bodies, right? And what we put in it matters. How do you have those conversations with young ones who don't quite understand the same way?
I think the best way is modeling and involving. So a lot of what we talk about in Sugarproof is getting kids involved at whatever level that is, deciding what to cook, deciding what to buy at the grocery store, helping in the kitchen, getting them involved in the process to kind of plant that early passion for the importance of food to the body. Um, I think that's probably the best strategy, is modeling and involving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. I mean, I see that, in the moms that I work with, and how much when they even learn, I mean, I'm going to add to that, right? When the parent even learns to enjoy that process, the kid is going to enjoy that process. Almost all of my clients now, adult women that I work with, have these beliefs that, cooking is boring, and I suck at cooking. and I don't know what to eat. Like there's all of these belief systems about even being in the kitchen that we've developed from childhood, right? About like, well, I hate cooking and grocery shopping is a waste of time. And so I'd like to add, any parents out there, like, can you make that whole process fun, right? Like, oh, we're going to the farmer's market today and we're going to pick out all these amazing foods and we're going to meal plan together. And like you said, right, let's get in the kitchen and make it fun. I know so many parents so short on time, right? Always feeling rushed. It's just easier to leave the kid out of the kitchen, right? Sometimes.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
do you have anything to add there? Like how can parents, I'm not a parent, but I've worked with a lot, so I can understand this, right? And even sometimes when I'm in a rush, I just want nobody in the kitchen. Leave me to it. I've got 20 minutes to make dinner. Get out of my way. I got to get this done and then get on to, take you to soccer practice. So how can parents maybe begin to slow down a little bit and invite the kids in a way that doesn't necessarily halt efficiency in the kitchen?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, but and it doesn't have to be much, and it can start with something small. I think there's kind of this idea that it's just going to be too overwhelming and just not worth the trouble and it's too much work. But it really can be a small change, like deciding, looking through a recipe book together, deciding, like you said, like deciding what we're going to have to eat this week. Any small things that you can do to get it started. You don't have to have an overnight revolution in terms of how you're operating things. It can just be, small miniature baby steps, literally, that kind of get you in that direction wherever you can start. It's only going to help. It doesn't have to all happen at once.
Yeah, I think that's such an important message, and I'm really grateful that you mentioned that because I see that with adults too. It's this belief that now I know how horrible sugar is. I've got to tomorrow. It has to all be out of the house. We have to be eating this whole new way, and that overwhelm and confusion. Well, how do I even do that? How do I even start to cook differently? How do we even do all of this? Becomes so overwhelming that I know for most people, the shutdown shows up, right? It's like, well, I'm just not going to bother,
Yeah,
right? Or it's too hard,
yeah.
so I'm not even going to do anything. So I love
Just
that reminder of these baby steps, right? One small thing, right? Switching your fruit juice to water, with berries in it, right? Is going to be like all those things. If you're making a small change every week is going to massively add up, right?
I mean, you could take that example and you could even slow that down and say, take your, fruit juice, just dilute it, add a bit of water to it.
Right.
If you can like dilute apple juice even, 25%, 25/75, you've cut your sugar load there down by 25%.
Yeah.
Maybe next week 50/50. So you can kind of gradually taper down some of these things too in
Yeah.
ways that will be, small changes, but will add up and magnify
Yeah.
over time.
Yeah. Great reminder. Yeah. I did take a big leap there from fruit juice to water, right? Slow down. Yeah.
Doesn't, yeah,
Yeah.
you, you,
Good
you,
catch.
you can do it. You can do it gradually.
Yeah. 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 And this is for kids and adults, right? Like all of this is so applicable, but it can be
Hmm.
trickier, right? With kids. And I appreciate
Hmm.
you sharing I'm learning a lot here. I'm going to be so ready if I choose to have kids one day. Like this is, yeah, this is going to be so, so helpful. Um, so I know one other question that I had for you is like, I know you talk about this on your website, and I think this will really be relevant for a lot of my listeners is around like self-regulating sugar, right? Like can children, and maybe it depends on the age, right? But can children actually learn how to self-regulate when it comes to sugar? There's obviously so much that we can do to control at home, but what happens when, our kids are at a birthday party or our kids are at school, right? Or they're in all these situations where we have no control or we're
Hmm.
not with them,
Yeah.
right? To be able to learn for themselves to say no, right? Or to make better choices. Like how is that even possible for kids? And I'm assuming it's varies on the age. And then if it is possible, like how do we actually teach our kids to self motivate and to self regulate and make those decisions on their own?
Yeah. There's no easy answer to that question. I think it varies quite a lot, not just by age, but from child to child and family to family. I mean, I think For in Sugarproof, the overall goal for us was to work towards better self-regulation. Doesn't guarantee it, but again, it's all about modeling and working together. And it's not going to be perfect once once your kids are out there in the world, because there is so many exposures and pressures, social pressures, and so on. So it's difficult, but I think that whatever you can do together as a family to help nurture that information and that knowledge, it will have an impact. It's not guaranteed. I don't know if it'd be a small effect or a big effect. Very hard to know, but anything you can do is going to be helpful at the end of the day. And really, the Sugarproof strategy ultimately is all about promoting better self-regulation.
Yeah, ultimately we need to empower uh, children, right? We need to empower all of ourselves, right? To be able to make our own decisions
Yeah,
and to not
yeah,
feel, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation that I'm really passionate about, but not feel shamed as well, right? Like you made the wrong
right.
decision or you're a bad girl because you had a donut at your friend's house, right? Like
Yeah,
there's so
that's
much food shaming.
we don't want that. We absolutely,
No.
do not want that to be an outcome, and that's why we don't take a very overly strict stance on it,
Yeah.
because food is part of, well, first of all, food is there to be enjoyed, and it's an important part of the social structure for kids, and we don't want them, feeling shame about it, or having a negative impact on their mental health. So there is some kind of a lot of uh, room for independent choices.
Yeah, I'm just thinking as you're talking, like how tricky this is for kids, right? I'm even thinking of my own childhood of like if you're the one that shows up at school with the healthy lunch, right? And now you're the odd one out. You feel like the weirdo, right? People are making fun of you. Like there's a lot here that's so complicated, especially at the young age when our social circles are life or death, right? I know they were for me, right?
Yeah.
And not being the weird one out, right, is so important. And being able to confidently say no, I don't want that donut, or is really difficult, like the peer pressure and the social pressures. And I wonder if we handle
Or
this the same way that we educate kids around alcohol, right? I mean, I know there's a lot of work to be done there as well, but or
yeah,
drugs and alcohol, right? And being like, this is
but you can still be part of that. Like you could say, "Oh, I'll have half a donut,"
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or I'll
or
just have a bite, right? I'll have a little
let me
bit.
share that. Yeah, let me share that with you. Let's split it.
Yeah,
That.
yeah,
So there's still lots of ways that, if you have the knowledge, you can exercise that
yeah,
choice.
yeah,
Or if you're at the movies with your friends and everybody's getting soda, you can just put a lot more ice in your soda and end up diluting the soda, so you can still kind of partake in it. So
yeah.
I think there's
Yeah,
ways
get
to
the small
still
instead of the large, right?
get the small instead of the large. Yeah, there's still lots of room. There's lots of ways to still be part of it without feeling excluded or different or weird.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky, but
I
so
don't know.
so
I
important. I
have
want to
this
know.
issue myself because I don't drink alcohol. So I was at a dinner just the other night, and everybody was drinking wine and ordering wine, and they were doing a toast on champagne, and um, I felt a little bit of shame about, well, I don't I can I have a glass of sparkling water, please? And I don't like the way it affects my body. I have low blood pressure, so it's makes I'm susceptible to even lower blood pressure, which I don't want to happen in the middle of a dinner. So there's reasons why I don't want to do that. But there's ways around it. Give me a splash of champagne and I'll take a little sip,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, or
which is
sparkling water like you said. But yeah,
yeah.
that I mean, I know that too. That's still very ingrained in us, is to really be a part of the crowd, right? And if we're the
Hmm.
odd one out, like it's always going to be uncomfortable, right? It's
Yeah.
always going to be a bit tricky. And, I'm curious, like, how can we make being healthy cool? Right. Like, and I know actually with alcohol, this is a totally separate conversation, obviously, but what I see is in the health space, there are more and more people giving up alcohol. There are more and more people choosing not to drink because it's absolutely horrible for our health. Right. And then it's becoming almost like the norm, right? Or it's
Yeah,
becoming the cool thing to do. Oh, that's cool that you don't
yeah,
drink, as opposed to, why aren't you drinking? Like, have some. And so, like, I'm
yeah. It's
curious for
definitely
kids.
changing. Definitely changing.
Yeah, it's changing.
But
Like, that's
but
the question that
but
comes up for me, is like, how can we make eating healthy or bringing your own snacks to the movie theater cool? Right? Like, yeah, my mom made, for decades it hasn't been like, oh, your mom, made you bring your own nuts to school, or like, I guess you can't do that anymore, but it's that switch, right? That social switch that needs to happen, where just like smoking
yeah,
used to be cool, now it's not cool, right? So that switch, I'm so hopeful
that's
that one day that
that's
happens.
ultimately what we want. Yeah, we want some new TikTok craze to go
Yeah.
viral and change the way kids are thinking about it.
Yeah. So are you creating these TikTok videos yet, Michael? Like, you you need to be doing this.
We have done some that have worked quite well. We created a series of it wasn't on TikTok. We don't get a lot of traction on TikTok, at least not yet. I've just hired a new person. I've been without a social media person for almost a year, so it's been a little tricky because I have another job I'm supposed to do. So,
Yeah,
and
you're
it's
a
a
busy
full-time
guy.
job.
You're doing
Yeah.
some important
So,
things.
but we the most engaged bits of social media we've put out there are kids themselves weighing out sugar in things like breakfast cereals. We have a whole series of those, so we need to recycle them probably. But those were fairly had very high engagement.
Yeah.
Not in the millions, and not on TikTok, but that's we're going to be working towards that once I get my new person on board next month.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, there's so many creative things that you can do to help spread this message, right? And this
Yeah.
is one of the benefits of social media. I mean, I struggle with my relationship with that too. That's a whole nother conversation. But
Yes,
yeah, it is the way
absolutely.
to reach people, right? And to have that impact, and hopefully, make this a mainstream conversation, right? I mean, that's what we're all here to do, especially around the topic of sugar. It's like, let's
Yeah.
talk about this, and let's make eating healthy cool, right? Like, let's make these things, yeah, something to look up to, and to
Hmm.
be celebrated in school, right? To go against the grain, which is always so hard, but hopefully change is coming.
I think so, little by little.
Yeah.
It's baby steps. I think are all going in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been incredible. I mean it. We definitely have to have you back on the show to talk more, but I know it would be respectful of your time. Is there any, like, final thoughts, final messages, or anything that we didn't cover today that you really want to share?
We didn't talk about another passion I have currently, which is early feeding, and in particular formula feeding, and added sugars in formula, which is something that we're spending a lot of time in our research looking at. So, obviously breastfeeding is preferred, but it's almost 75% of kids are getting some type of formula at some stage. And it turns out that over half of all infant formula that's currently purchased has a sugar other than lactose in it. So lactose is the sugar that's in mother's milk, but the majority of infant formula now is made not with lactose. I mean, a lot of people don't realize this. It's kind of happened under the radar.
Wow.
And most infant formula is now made with corn syrup and not with lactose. So this is
Wow.
something that we're really, we've done some studies on this to show how it's affecting child development, and it's something we want to raise more knowledge and awareness about.
Yeah.
Um, there's very strict guidelines on what has to be in formula in terms of the iron level has to be above this, the magnesium level has to be above that. But for carbohydrate, which is the main component, there's just a requirement for it to have a certain amount of carbohydrate. So formula companies can make formula with any carbohydrate they want, including
Wow.
corn syrup and not lactose.
Wow.
Plus, sadly, the USDA does, um, doesn't require formula companies to label that as added sugar. So formula is exempt from all of the rulings about or surrounding labeling of added sugars.
Wow.
So there's several kind of problems here that need to be addressed, and we're doing a lot of work in that area. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Michael. That is something so important, because it is so prevalent, right? And I know a lot of mothers are having, for various reasons, to use formula, and that is really heartbreaking, to hear that the that of anything should be the highest quality, right? Especially those first 2 years of life, right? Where that is a big part of a child's intake and how their cells are creating and how their gut is
Yeah, yeah.
producing and all of this. And I also heard, and I don't know if this is right, and maybe you're not doing research on this, or maybe you are, about like the fats that they're adding to that too, being seed oils, right? Which we know are just as toxic as sugar, and like sunflower oil, and just, maybe also, all these other, canola oil and just vegetable oil in general. Is that anything that you're bringing into your study as well? Or are you just focusing on the sugar?
Right now, we're just focusing on the sugar
Yeah.
and the sugar composition. Yeah,
Yeah. One thing at a time, right? I mean, that's
yeah,
a whole nother ball game
yeah,
of
yeah.
research, I'm sure, right? And someone out there
Yes,
hopefully is doing
absolutely.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for mentioning that. So is there, obviously, a lot of my listeners are going to be wanting to know more. And everybody listening, go and buy a copy of Sugarproof. And of course, check out Michael's social media and website. I'll make sure those links are below this episode. Is there anything else that you want to maybe give as an action item, Michael, for anybody who's listening to this? Is there any areas that you recommend they go and do more research outside of your book, or any first steps that you recommend that they take?
I think we've mentioned a few in passing. So, again, you don't have to overhaul the way you're doing things. Start small. Look for next time you're at the grocery store. Check out the brands that you're buying. Check to see if there's any added sugars on there. And that's hard. There's over 200 different names for sugar, which could be on the ingredient list. So,
Yeah.
you know, food companies aren't making it easy for us consumers. But keep an eye on that. Try to keep liquid sugar out of the house. Sports drinks, energy drinks, fruit juice, even 100%. Eating fruit is okay, but don't drink it. And sodas, keep those out of the house if you can. There'll be plenty of opportunities outside the house uh, for that. But you can be in charge of what's in your kitchen, in your
Yeah.
fridge.
Yeah, that's a big, big part of it, right? Like what we can control versus what we can't, right? I know there's probably a lot of mothers and parents out there kind of driving themselves crazy over the things that they can't control, right? What the kid's
Yeah,
getting at
well,
school and at the friend's house. And yeah, I can imagine that's really tricky.
sometimes you got to just let go of that and focus on what you do have control over, and that
Yeah.
that can have an impact down the road, not just at that moment, but by doing that, you will start to be building up this ability to self-regulate, ability to make good choices when
Yeah.
the opportunities present themselves.
Yeah.
So you can't guarantee it, but you're moving in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for being here. This was so great to chat. I learned a lot. I'm so excited to have had this conversation with you, and for all the work that you've been doing. Just so much gratitude, and I hope that everybody listening really got a lot out of this and goes and buys the book. Reach out to Michael and his team. I know you have so many amazing recipes as well, Michael, on your website and on Instagram. So if you need some suggestions, Michael's definitely and his team have you covered. So there's no more excuses. There's options, right? There's so many options
Check
here.
it out.
And
Yep.
yeah,
Check out the
definitely check it out.
website, sugarproofkids.com. or on Instagram at Sugarproof Kids. And thank you so much, Danny, for having me on, and thank you to everybody out there for listening. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, it's been wonderful. Wonderful to have you. Thanks again, everyone, for listening to another episode, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. If you're loving what we talked about today, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone you love. And if you're ready to dive deeper into discovering your root causes and patterns that are keeping you hooked on sugar, be sure to check out our brand new free workshop series that will help you kick emotional eating for good. Find the link to download this free series and other amazing resources in the show notes below.